My name is Jessica, and at 32 years old, after 5 brutal years of sacrifice, I was finally graduating as a nurse practitioner. But my entire family, including my husband and kids, chose to skip it. My own brother told me, "Sorry, but this $150,000 miracle cure seminar for Dad is more important than your little ceremony." They drove off, mocking my warnings, leaving me utterly alone at the biggest moment of my life. They had no idea I had already sent their so-called cure to a private lab, and I was just holding my breath, waiting for the one phone call I knew was coming. The university auditorium was vast, filled with the echoing sound of applause, as names were called one by one. I sat on stage with my fellow graduates, a sea of black gowns and hopeful faces trying to focus on the moment. This was it, the culmination of everything I had worked for. But my eyes kept drifting to a spot in the third-row house left. 5 empty seats, stark and accusatory, in the middle of a cheering crowd. One for my husband Michael, one for each of our 2 children, and 2 for my parents. They were supposed to be my proudest supporters. Instead, they were a void. 5 years. I'd spent 5 years juggling a full-time nursing job, raising 2 kids, and attending night classes. I wrote papers at 2 in the morning, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower after tucking the children into bed. I studied flashcards during my lunch breaks and used my vacation days for clinical rotations instead of family trips. Every sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of this day, and my primary motivation through it all was my father. He'd been battling a chronic respiratory illness for years, and I pursued this advanced degree to gain the knowledge and authority to manage his care, to give him a better quality of life when the current system was failing him. The irony was crushing. The very degree I earned to help him was deemed less important than the snake oil my brother Kevin was selling. I'd seen the brochure for the seminar. It was filled with vague promises and pseudoscientific jargon run by a man with no medical credentials. I had pointed this out calmly, rationally during a family dinner. I was dismissed as a cynic, a killjoy who only trusted mainstream medicine. As I waited for my name to be called, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my gown. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't resist. It was a text from my mother. It wasn't a message of apology or regret. It was a single, devastating sentence. "We're on our way to the seminar. This is your father's only hope." Hope. They had invested all their hope in my father's life savings, $150,000, into a charlatan, while my 5 years of evidence-based education meant nothing. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a cold resolve settling over the hurt. I would walk across that stage. I would accept my diploma. I would smile for the camera. But I wasn't just celebrating an academic achievement anymore. I was preparing for a battle they didn't even know was coming. I didn't know it yet, but their $150,000 decision would soon become the most expensive piece of evidence against them. The whole thing blew up about a month before my graduation, during what was supposed to be a calm Sunday dinner. It was a weekly tradition, a time for us to connect. But that night, my brother Kevin arrived with an electric energy, a manic glint in his eye that always preceded one of his grand, often misguided ideas. He waited until we were all seated, my father breathing with the familiar labored rhythm from his oxygen tank in the corner, before he made his announcement. He had found the answer. He dramatically placed a small dark green bottle with a gold label on the center of the table. The label read, "Bio Restore Elixir." It looked expensive and vaguely medicinal, designed to prey on the desperate. Kevin launched into his pitch, speaking with the breathless excitement of a convert. He told us about a revolutionary healer he had found online, a man who used ancient herbal wisdom to create this elixir that could supposedly reverse chronic illness. He spoke of testimonials of people throwing away their walkers of lungs regenerating. My father's eyes, usually clouded with fatigue, lit up with a flicker of hope. My mother clasped her hands together, already sold. Even Michael, my husband, leaned forward, intrigued. I, however, felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This had all the hallmarks of a classic predatory health scam. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my tone gentle and inquisitive, not confrontational. Kevin, what are the active ingredients in it? I asked. Are there any clinical trials or peer reviewed studies supporting these claims? He scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Jess, this is beyond your textbooks. This is holistic energy, not chemicals. You can't put this in a lab. He then turned his charm on our parents. He told them about an exclusive weekend-long seminar with the healer himself. It was the only way to get a full course of the treatment. The price, I asked, my voice flat. Kevin looked at our parents, not at me. It is an investment in Dad's future. $150,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and obscene. It was their entire life savings. Before I could protest further, my mother jumped in. Jessica, you have to understand. We need to have faith. Your medicine has only managed the symptoms, but this could be a cure. Her words stung. My medicine. The years of study, the evidence-based protocols I was learning were reduced to just my medicine. Impersonal and ineffective in her eyes. I looked at Michael, pleading with my eyes for him to be my voice of reason, to back me up. He just shrugged, avoiding my gaze. He said, well, we should at least hear him out. I was outnumbered. I tried one last time, explaining the dangers of unverified treatments, the psychological manipulation, the financial ruin. But they looked at me like I was the enemy of hope, the cold clinical daughter who couldn't see a miracle when it was sitting on the dinner table. They saw a miracle. I saw a ticking time bomb in a pretty green bottle. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stop them with words. I would need proof. After that disastrous dinner, a heavy silence settled in our house. Michael and I moved around each other like strangers, the unspoken argument a wall between us. He knew I was right, but he lacked the courage to stand up to my family's tidal wave of false hope. I realized then that logic was a foreign language to them. Arguing would be useless. If I was going to protect my father, I couldn't do it by being the confrontational daughter. I had to be the clinician. I had to collect data. A couple of days later, I called Kevin. I forced a warm, conciliatory tone into my voice, swallowing every ounce of my pride. Hey, I said, I have been thinking a lot about what you said. I am sorry if I came off as negative. You are just trying to help Dad, and I respect that. I could almost hear him preen through the phone. It is about time you saw that, Jess. I continued with the script I had rehearsed in my head. As his healthcare provider, I just have a professional responsibility to make sure nothing interacts badly with his current prescriptions. It would make me feel a lot better if you could send me a small sample of the elixir. I can run a quick screen for contraindications. It is just standard procedure. The hook was set. By framing it as my professional duty, I played right into his ego. He loved the idea of his discovery being subjected to my serious scientific scrutiny, confident it would pass. Of course, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I will overnight you a bottle. You will see. This stuff is the real deal. The small package arrived the next day. The green bottle felt heavy in my hand, a physical representation of my family's delusion. I didn't take it to the hospital lab where questions might be asked. Instead, I went online and found a private accredited chemical analysis lab in another state that promised confidentiality. It wasn't cheap. I paid for a full toxicology and composition report with my own credit card, a rush order. That afternoon, I carefully packaged the vial according to their instructions and sent it off via a secure courier. After the courier left, I took the original box and the now empty sample bottle and sealed them in a Ziploc bag. I printed out the lab submission form and the courier receipt. I walked into my small home office, the same room where I had spent countless nights studying, and opened a locked file box where I kept my most important academic papers. I placed the bag and the receipts inside, right next to a copy of my nearly finished thesis. My anger from the dinner had faded, replaced by a cold, methodical focus. I felt like a scientist observing an experiment, knowing the inevitable catastrophic result. I just needed the data to prove it. I put the small vial inside the box. I had a feeling I would need it soon, not as a cure, but as an exhibit. The lab results were still pending when they called the meeting. It wasn't an invitation so much as a summons. I walked into my parents' living room to find them all there, a united front. Kevin, my mother, my father, and Michael. They were sitting together on the large sectional sofa, leaving a single armchair for me positioned opposite them. It felt less like a family discussion and more like an intervention or an interrogation. I was the one on trial. I had come prepared. I carried a thin folder with printouts detailing the so-called healer's complete lack of medical credentials. I had articles on common health scams that used the exact same marketing language. I decided to start calmly to lay out the facts as I would to a patient's family, avoiding emotion and focusing on logic. I spoke for 10 minutes, my voice even and steady. I presented the evidence, the red flags, the pattern of exploitation. I explained that hope is important, but false hope is dangerous and expensive. I ended by saying, I am not asking you to abandon hope. I am asking you to wait. Let me get the sample analyzed. Let us have real data before you risk $150,000 and Dad's health. Kevin just laughed. It was a short, ugly sound. He accused me of being arrogant, of thinking my new degree made me the smartest person in the room. He said I was just jealous that he had found a solution while I was still stuck in textbooks. He claimed I couldn't stand to see Dad get better without my intervention. The personal attack was designed to hurt, and it did. But my mother's words cut deeper. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me, her voice trembling with disappointment. Jessica, where is your faith? Where is your heart? Your father is suffering, and we finally have a chance, a real chance. Why do you need to tear it down? Why can't you just support us for once? Every head in the room nodded in agreement. I felt the walls closing in. My last line of defense was my husband. I turned to Michael, my eyes begging him to step in to be my partner, to say something. This was his moment to be my husband, to defend my professional judgment and my character. He just stared at the coffee table, tracing patterns on its surface with his finger. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The silence stretched on thick and suffocating. He cleared his throat, and for a heart-stopping second I thought he was going to defend me. He finally spoke, but his words were not for me. They were for them. He said, "This is a family matter, not your classroom." That was it. That was the moment I knew I was utterly and completely alone. The decision was made. They would go. And I, the one person with the knowledge to save my father, had been officially silenced. I drove home from my parents' house that night in a daze. The world outside my car was a blur of headlights and rain-slicked streets. Inside, there was only a profound silence. Michael didn't say a word, and neither did I. What was there to say? His betrayal, his public abandonment of me, hung between us heavier than any argument could be. Back at home, he went straight to the den to watch TV, and I went upstairs to our bedroom, the quiet of the house amplifying the storm in my head. I felt like I had lost on every front. I had lost the argument, lost my family's trust, and worst of all, lost my partner. Later that night, long after I had changed and was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, he finally came in. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me. For a long time, he just sat there. I thought maybe he wouldn't speak at all. Then quietly he said, "You know, you made some good points tonight." I didn't answer. I was too wary, too hurt to engage. He sighed. "I am worried too, Jess. It sounds a little crazy to me, but you saw them. They are so desperate for a miracle. Arguing with them head on just makes them dig in their heels." A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Was this him finally coming over to my side? Was this the apology I was waiting for? He turned to look at me, his expression earnest. "Let me handle it. I will talk to Kevin tomorrow. Man to man. I can be more diplomatic. I will make him see reason without making it feel like an attack. Just trust me." And like a fool, I did. I wanted to believe him so badly. I wanted to believe that the man I married was still in there, the man who was supposed to be my teammate. The relief was so intense it almost brought me to tears. I wasn't alone anymore. "We were going to face this together." "Okay," I whispered. "Thank you." I fell asleep that night with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. It was a peace that lasted less than 24 hours. The next evening, he came home from work and found me in the kitchen. He didn't look at me as he spoke, busying himself with getting a glass of water from the fridge. So I talked to everyone. He said, his tone casual, almost breezy. And we all think it is for the best if I go with them. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. What? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, he continued, still not meeting my eyes. That way I can be there to keep an eye on things. Make sure Dad is okay, be the voice of reason if things get weird. It is the best way to manage the situation. I stared at his back, the hope from the night before turning to ash in my mouth. I saw his words for what they were. Not a strategy, not a compromise. It was a surrender. He wasn't going there to protect my father. He was going because he was too afraid to tell my mother and my brother no. He was going because it was easier to manage my disappointment than to face their anger. He had never been on my side at all. He had just been placating me. The day they left was the day before my graduation. The air in our house was thick with a kind of determined cheerfulness that did not include me. My mother was packing snacks into a cooler, my children were excitedly discussing the hotel swimming pool, and Michael was loading suitcases into the back of the SUV. They were a family unit embarking on an adventure, and I was just a ghost haunting the edges of their excitement. I knew this was my last chance to speak to my father alone. I found him in the living room sitting in his armchair while Kevin fussed over his portable oxygen concentrator. I knelt beside his chair, taking his hand. It felt frail in mine. Dad, I said softly, ignoring Kevin. I just want you to know that I love you. Please be careful. Please just listen to your body. Before he could answer, my mother walked in, her purse on her shoulder. Jessica, do not upset your father before such a long trip. We need to keep his spirits up. He needs positivity right now, not doubt. She stepped between us, a physical barrier, patting his shoulder and talking about the beautiful scenery they were going to see. Kevin put a hand on my dad's other shoulder, effectively boxing me out. It is all taken care of, Jess. I have his whole medication schedule. Now is not the time. It was a perfectly executed maneuver. They had cut me off not with anger, but with the suffocating kindness of people who believe they are doing the right thing. I stood up defeated. There was nothing more I could say. My father gave me a small apologetic look over their shoulders, but he didn't challenge them. I went to the front window and watched them finish packing. I watched my own children climb into the back seat, their faces bright with anticipation, without a single backward glance at me. Michael shut the rear hatch, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. He looked at the house for a moment, and I think he saw me in the window, but he didn't wave. Nobody did. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded completely. The silence they left behind was vast and absolute. The house felt huge and empty. The SUV disappeared down the street, carrying my entire family and their $150,000 worth of false hope. But as the quiet settled around me, I realized they had left me with something incredibly valuable. They left me with the silence I needed to think. I drove home from the graduation ceremony in a strange, hollow quiet. The cap and gown were a crumpled heap on the passenger seat, the diploma case a meaningless plastic rectangle on the dashboard. The house was just as I had left it, still and silent. The emptiness felt different now, heavier. Before, it was the quiet of a house waiting for a family to return. Now it was the quiet of a house that had been abandoned. I changed out of my dress and into an old sweatshirt. The motions automatic my mind, a blank slate of exhaustion and hurt. I sat on the couch staring at nothing when my phone chimed on the coffee table. It was an email. The subject line was simple, just a lab reference number. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was from the analysis lab. This was it. My hand was shaking as I picked up the phone and opened the email. There was a short, formal message and a single attachment, a PDF file. I tapped on it and the document loaded, filling the screen with columns of data, chemical compound names, and technical jargon. I scrolled past the raw data, my eyes searching for the summary, the part written in plain English. And then I found it. The report laid out in stark clinical detail exactly what was in Kevin's miracle elixir. It was mostly sugar water and some common harmless herbal extracts. It was, as I had suspected, a complete and utter fraud. But that wasn't the worst part. I kept reading my blood turning to ice. The lab had identified another more potent unlisted botanical compound. The report noted that this specific alkaloid, when ingested by an individual on beta-blocker medication, the exact class of drug my father took for his blood pressure, could trigger a severe hypotensive crisis. A sudden, catastrophic drop in blood pressure leading to dizziness, fainting, and in a patient with already compromised lungs, acute respiratory distress. The pain of the empty seats, the sting of my family's betrayal, it all vanished. It was vaporized by a new, terrifying emotion. A cold, sharp, and intensely focused calm. This was no longer about my hurt feelings. This was no longer about a family disagreement or wasted money. This was about a direct, predictable, and life-threatening danger. It wasn't just a scam. It was a loaded gun, and my brother had just handed it to our father. The report on my phone wasn't just proof that I was right. It was evidence of a potential homicide, and I was the only person in the world who had it. My first instinct was to panic, to call them to scream into the phone to read the damning sentences from the report until they listened. My thumb hovered over Michael's contact number. I could picture the scene perfectly. I would sound hysterical. My brother would call me a liar, accuse me of faking a report to ruin their trip and prove my point. My mother would say I was being cruel trying to scare them. They had built a fortress of denial, and my panicked words would be nothing but arrows bouncing harmlessly off its walls. They had made it clear they would not listen to me. So I wouldn't give them the chance to dismiss me again. I lowered the phone. The surge of adrenaline I felt was not from fear, but from a profound, chilling clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I walked to my home office and connected my phone to my laptop. Methodically, I saved the PDF of the lab report in 3 separate places. I uploaded it to a secure cloud server. I emailed a password-protected copy to my personal email address, and I saved it onto a small encrypted USB drive that I dropped into my purse. Then I sent the file to our home printer. The machine whirred to life, the sound cutting through the oppressive silence of the house. I watched as the pages slid out one by one, warm to the touch. The clinical black and white text felt solid, real, and undeniable in my hands. I clipped the pages together and slipped them into a sleek, professional portfolio, the kind I used for important work presentations. With the evidence secured, I walked upstairs. I stepped into the shower and let the hot water run over me, consciously washing away the day's humiliation and grief. I wasn't the abandoned wife or the dismissed daughter anymore. The graduation ceremony felt like a lifetime ago, a trivial event from someone else's life. When I stepped out, I didn't put on comfortable loungewear. I chose a pair of dark trousers and a simple, crisp blouse. I put on a watch. I was dressing not for bed, but for duty. Downstairs, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, the ritual a stark contrast to the chaos I knew was unfolding hundreds of miles away. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the one directly facing the front door. I placed my car keys, my purse, and the portfolio containing the printed report on the small table beside me. Everything was in its place. Everything was ready. The house was still. The clock on the wall ticked each second a slow, deliberate step toward the inevitable. I wasn't waiting as a victim. I was waiting as a clinician who had read a patient's chart and was now simply anticipating the entirely predictable cardiac arrest. My phone sat dark and silent on the table. I knew it wouldn't be silent for long. I didn't have to wait long. The clock on the wall had just ticked past 10 p.m. when the silence was shattered. My phone sitting on the table beside me began to vibrate, its screen lighting up the dim room with a frantic, pulsing glow. The name displayed was Kevin. The moment had arrived. I let it ring 3 times, a deliberate, measured delay. I took a slow breath, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. There was no spike of adrenaline, no surge of fear. There was only the calm focus of a professional about to enter a critical situation. On the 4th ring, I picked up the phone. "Hello, Kevin," I said, my voice even. The sound that came back was a choked, panicked sob. "Jess. Jessica." Thank God something is wrong with Dad. It happened so fast. I could hear my mother wailing in the background, a high, thin sound of terror. I pictured the scene. The generic hotel room, the half-unpacked suitcases, the lingering smell of room service. And now, chaos. "Kevin, listen to me," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria with surgical precision. "Tell me exactly what is happening." He was using the elixir. Kevin stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "Just like the healer said." And then he just slumped over. "He can't breathe. Jess." His lips are turning blue. "We called an ambulance. They are on their way, but I don't know what to do. It is happening." I thought, a cold, detached part of my brain analyzing the data. The hypotensive crisis. Just as the report predicted. I stood up, my movements fluid and unhurried. I picked up my car keys from the table. "Kevin," I said into the phone, and my voice was so calm it seemed to belong to someone else. "You did the right thing by calling for help. Now I need you to listen to me very carefully. Which hospital are they taking him to?" He stammered out the name of a regional medical center about an hour's drive from their seminar location. "Okay," I replied. "You will go with him in the ambulance. You will give the paramedics his full medical history, including all of his prescription medications. Do you understand?" "Yes, yes, I think so." "Good. Stay at the hospital. Do not leave for any reason. I am on my way." I hung up the phone before he could ask any questions, before he could say another word. The sound of my brother's panic was still a faint echo in the quiet room. I felt no fear, no pity. I felt nothing but a singular driving purpose. I slipped on my shoes, picked up my purse, and then I picked up the leather portfolio from the table. Its weight felt solid and reassuring in my hand. Their desperate, improvised drama was over. My carefully rehearsed performance was about to begin. The drive to the hospital was a blur of dark highways and the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers against a light drizzle. I didn't speed. I didn't rush. Every action was deliberate. When I walked through the automatic doors of the emergency room, the familiar smell of antiseptic and anxiety hit me. The scene at the reception desk was exactly what I expected. My mother was slumped in a chair, her face buried in her hands. Kevin was pacing frantically, his hair a mess, his expensive suit rumpled. Michael stood beside him, looking pale and helpless. They all looked up as I approached, a wave of relief washing over their faces. Kevin rushed towards me. "Jess, you are here. They don't know what is wrong. They have run tests, but nothing makes sense. He is not responding." I walked past them, my focus entirely on the triage nurse. "I am Jessica Miller," I said, my voice clear and professional. "I am a nurse practitioner and the daughter of the patient who was just admitted with respiratory distress. I need to speak to the attending physician immediately." The nurse, seeing my composure, nodded and pointed me towards a curtained-off bay. As I walked, my family trailed behind me like lost children. Inside, I found a young doctor frowning at a monitor displaying my father's erratic vitals. He lay on the gurney, looking small and pale, an oxygen mask covering his face. "Doctor," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. He turned, surprised by my sudden appearance. "I am his daughter. He is in hypotensive shock from a drug interaction. His blood pressure is bottoming out because he ingested an unlisted botanical alkaloid that is reacting with his beta blocker medication." The doctor stared at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "I am sorry. Who are you?" How could you possibly know that I didn't answer him directly? I looked past him at my mother and Kevin, who were now standing in the doorway, their faces slack with shock. They looked at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The chaos in the room seemed to freeze all eyes on me. I had their complete, undivided attention. Then I turned back to the doctor. I said calmly, "You need to administer a bolus of intravenous epinephrine now. Then you need to prepare for intubation. And you need to do it before he goes into full cardiac arrest." The entire room fell silent. My mother and Kevin stared at me as if I were a monster. The doctor hesitated for a fraction of a second, his medical training warring with the sheer strangeness of the situation. He looked from me to the monitor, then back to me. My unwavering confidence, the clinical precision of my language, must have cut through his confusion. He didn't have time to ask questions. My father's condition was critical. He barked an order to a nearby nurse, repeating my exact instructions. Epinephrine stat. Get the crash cart ready. As the medical team sprang into action, a new kind of silence descended upon the bay. It was the silence of utter bewilderment. Michael, who had been hovering uselessly in the corner, finally found his voice. Jess, what is going on? How did you know that I didn't look at him? I didn't look at any of them. I kept my eyes on my father as I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather portfolio. I walked over to the small counter where the doctor had been writing notes and placed it down. I opened it and took out the printed lab report, the pages crisp and clean. I held it out to the doctor, who had just stepped back after administering the injection. Here, I said. This should answer your questions. This is a full chemical analysis of the so-called miracle cure my brother gave to my father less than an hour ago. The doctor took the papers, his eyes scanning the first page. His eyebrows shot up. He flipped to the summary section, his expression shifting from surprise to dawning comprehension and then to a grim, professional anger. From the doorway, I heard a choked sound. It was Kevin. He was staring at the report in the doctor's hands, then at me, his face ashen. The confident, arrogant salesman was gone. In his place was a man who was finally horrifyingly understanding the consequences of his actions. He knew what that paper was. He knew that I knew. I had not just guessed right, I had known all along, and I had the proof. While the medical team worked to stabilize my father, the doctor handed the report back to me. He looked at my mother and brother with an expression of cold fury. You two are incredibly lucky she was here, he said, his voice low and tight. You could have killed him. He then turned and walked away, his disgust palpable. His words hung in the air, a final verdict. My mother finally broke down her sobs, raw and ragged. Kevin just stood there leaning against the doorframe as if his bones had dissolved. This was my moment. The playing field had been leveled and I was the only one left standing. I turned to face them, my voice calm but unforgiving. Do you see? Now? I asked, my gaze sweeping over all three of them, Michael included. This is what happens when you trade science for a fantasy. This is the consequence of your faith. I pulled out my phone. A month ago, I tried to warn all of you. I presented facts, and you accused me of being jealous and negative. I held up the phone, showing them the screen. My mother's text from earlier in the day was still there. This is your father's only hope. I looked directly at my mother. Was this your hope, Mom, to see him lying on a gurney with a tube down his throat? I then turned to Kevin. And you. You were so desperate to be the hero, to be the favorite son with the magic solution that you never once stopped to consider you might be wrong. You gambled with Dad's life to feed your own ego. Finally, I turned to Michael. And you, my husband, you stood there and said nothing. You chose their feelings over my facts. You chose harmony over my husband's safety. You failed him, and you failed me. The $150,000 you spent on this seminar, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, wasn't an investment. It was the price of your ignorance, and it almost cost us everything. My mother started to cry again. This time I felt nothing at all. An hour later, after my father had been stabilized and moved to the intensive care unit, I found them huddled together in the sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room. Kevin was staring blankly at the floor, replaying his catastrophic failure. My mother's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Michael just looked broken, a man adrift without a leader to follow. They looked up at me as I approached, their expressions a mixture of fear and exhaustion. I did not sit down. I stood before them, a position of authority. From my portfolio, I removed a single folded document and placed it on the small table between us. The crisp sound of the paper unfolding was the only noise in the room. What is that? Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. It is a medical power of attorney form. I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. It legally designates one person to make all healthcare decisions for a patient who cannot make them for himself. Given the events of tonight, I am sure you all agree that my father is in that position, and that person is going to be me. I let the words sink in. I looked at my mother, then at Kevin. You have both demonstrated a catastrophic lack of judgment. You are a danger to him. Your opinions on his health are no longer relevant. They are inadmissible. From this moment on, you will not suggest treatments, you will not offer supplements. You will not even give him an aspirin without clearing it with me first. Is that understood? They just stared at the paper as if it were a death sentence. I have already signed it. I continued, tapping a line at the bottom. I just need 2 witnesses, and that is where you two come in. You will sign this acknowledging that you witnessed my appointment. You will legally affirm that my authority supersedes yours. They had no choice. To refuse would be to admit in front of everyone that they were actively trying to obstruct his proper medical care. After the night they just had, it was an untenable position. Kevin picked up the pen first, his hand trembling. My mother followed. The game was over, and I had just written the final unbreakable rule. In the days that followed, the new reality settled in like a permanent chilling frost. Kevin, the golden child, the charismatic son who could do no wrong, was utterly broken. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out silence. He spent his time at the hospital sitting in the waiting room, not daring to enter my father's room unless I was there. He had lost his voice, his influence, and most importantly, his audience. My parents no longer looked to him for answers or grand ideas. They looked at him with a muted, weary disappointment. I made no effort to console him or absolve him of his guilt. When he tried to apologize to me one afternoon, his voice cracking, I simply cut him off. Kevin, your apology is irrelevant to me. The only thing that matters is Dad's health. You can prove you are sorry by staying out of my way and not making any more catastrophic decisions. His role in the family had been fundamentally rewritten. He was no longer the star of the show. He was a silent spectator, stripped of his power, forced to watch me, his overlooked sister, manage the crisis he had created. He had flown too close to the sun on wings of arrogance, and now he was grounded, his confidence in ashes. His financial recklessness also came to light. The $150,000 was gone completely non-refundable. He had signed a contract with the healer that waived all liability. There would be no lawsuit, no getting the money back. It was the price of admission to a nightmare, and now he had to live with the knowledge that he had single-handedly wiped out our parents' life savings. He would call me asking for updates on Dad's condition, his voice small and tentative. I kept the conversations brief and clinical, giving him only the necessary medical information. There was no warmth, no sisterly comfort. I was his superior officer, and he was the disgraced subordinate. He once asked if there was anything he could do to help. I told him yes. You can learn to listen to people who know more than you do. For the first time in his life, my brother was no longer the center of our family's universe. He was just a silent, orbiting moon, his light completely extinguished. The power shift at home was just as absolute, but quieter. My mother, who had always deferred to Kevin's charm and my father's authority, was now adrift. With my father incapacitated and Kevin disgraced, the family's leadership vacuum was filled by me. And I managed the household like I managed my father's care, with calm clinical efficiency. I created schedules, I made lists, I delegated tasks. My mother was assigned specific times to sit with my father so I could consult with doctors or get some rest. Michael was put in charge of all communication with the extended family, tasked with providing carefully worded updates that maintained our privacy. Even the children were given responsibilities, ensuring their homework was done, and the house stayed relatively tidy. My relationship with Michael became a series of logistical conversations. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't talk about our marriage. We talked about doctor's appointments, prescription refills, and who was picking up the kids from school. He tried a few times to open the door to a more personal conversation. He would start with Jess about that night, but I would cut him off. Not now, Michael. We need to focus on Dad. He became my subordinate, my assistant. He followed my instructions without question. The man who had told me our family was not my classroom was now living in a world where my word was law. He saw firsthand the immense mental and organizational load I had always carried, the load he had been blind to. He watched me navigate complex medical systems, challenge doctors' assumptions, and manage a crisis with a competence he couldn't deny. He was a witness to my power, a power he had never acknowledged until he was completely subject to it. Our home was still the same four walls, but the balance of power within it had irrevocably changed. The family now revolved around a new son, and the old order was gone forever. My new role wasn't just about giving orders. It was about building an entirely new system from the ground up, a system designed to protect my father, not just from illness, but from the well-intentioned incompetence of his own family. I transformed from a daughter into his dedicated case manager. My first act was to consolidate all of his medical records, a chaotic mess of papers from a dozen different specialists, into a single, meticulously organized digital file that I could access from my phone. I created a new medication chart, color-coded and simplified, and taped it to the refrigerator. Each dose had to be initialed by either me or my mother, creating a clear chain of accountability. I scheduled all of his follow-up appointments, arranging for medical transport, and ensuring his primary care physician was updated after every consultation. I researched and implemented a new dietary plan for him, one that supported his recovery, and I taught my mother how to prepare the meals. This wasn't an act of love in the way my family understood it. It wasn't warm or fuzzy. It was an act of professional responsibility. I was applying the skills I had spent 5 years learning, the very skills they had dismissed. My family watched me with a kind of awe. They had never seen this side of me, the organized, authoritative clinician who could command a room of doctors and nurses with quiet confidence. They had only ever seen the wife, the mother, the daughter, the person whose needs and achievements were always secondary. During this time, I wasn't just managing my father's care. I was building a fortress of competence around him. Every organized file, every scheduled appointment, every verified medication was a brick in that wall. It was a wall designed to keep chaos and ignorance out. I had pursued my degree to save people. I just never imagined that my very first patient, the one I had to save from a system of misinformation and blind faith, would be my own family. A week after he was moved from the ICU to a regular recovery room, I finally had a moment alone with my father. The frantic beeping of the emergency room had been replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of the hospital ward. He was awake and lucid, the fog of the medical crisis finally lifting. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a simple nasal cannula. The color had returned to his face. I was sitting by his bedside, updating his chart on my laptop, when he reached out and placed his hand over mine. His touch was weak but firm. I stopped typing and looked at him. His eyes, clear for the first time in days, were filled with a profound sadness and an even more profound understanding. "Jesse," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I heard everything, from that night in the ER." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, my throat suddenly tight. He squeezed my hand. "You were right. You were right about everything. And we were all so stupid, so stubborn. We didn't listen." I could see the tears welling up in his eyes, and I felt my own composure begin to crack. The anger I had held onto for so long, the cold, clinical resolve began to melt away, replaced by a wave of raw, aching emotion. He continued, his voice thick with regret. "All those years you were studying, I thought you were just busy, distant. I never understood what you were really doing. You were building an ark, and we were all too busy laughing at you to see the storm coming. You saved my life." That was it. That was the recognition I had been craving for 5 long years. It wasn't about the applause at a graduation ceremony. It wasn't about a fancy dinner or a congratulatory card. It was this quiet moment. This simple, honest admission from the person whose life I had worked so hard to improve. "Thank you, Dad." I whispered, my own tears finally falling. "No," he said, his voice firm. "Thank you. I am so proud of you." He looked at me, truly. Looked at me, perhaps for the first time, not just as his daughter, but as a capable, intelligent woman who had earned his respect. My degree might hang on a wall someday, but that single moment of recognition shining in my father's eyes was the real diploma. It was the only one that ever truly mattered. 2 months passed. My father grew stronger every day, the rhythms of our new life becoming the new normal. The tension in our house slowly eased, replaced by a quiet, cautious respect. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic scenes of forgiveness. There was simply the steady daily work of rebuilding on a new foundation, a foundation I had laid. To mark the end of his home recovery, I decided to host a small family dinner. It was a Sunday evening, much like the one where this whole ordeal had begun, but the atmosphere was profoundly different. Michael moved around the kitchen with a newfound attentiveness, helping me serve the food. Kevin, quiet and reserved, made sure our father's glass was always full of water. My mother simply watched, a complex mix of regret and awe in her eyes. When we were all seated, I raised my glass. The 5 seats that had been empty at my graduation were full tonight. Everyone looked at me waiting. I said, "We are not here tonight to celebrate a diploma. That is just a piece of paper. We are here to mark a new beginning." My graduation wasn't just about finishing school. It was about learning a hard lesson, that protecting the people you love doesn't mean giving them false hope. It means fighting for the truth, even when it is difficult, even when they don't want to hear it. I looked at each of them in turn. My toast wasn't about forgiveness. It was about principles. It was a statement of my new terms and conditions. I continued, "My achievement isn't hanging on a wall. It is sitting here at this table. It is seeing Dad healthy. It is knowing that from now on, this family will be guided by knowledge, not by fear or fantasy. That is something worth celebrating." We all clinked glasses. It wasn't a loud, joyous sound. It was a quiet, solemn acknowledgement, a pact. The empty celebration I had dreaded was gone. In its place was this a meal earned not by blind faith, but by hard-won respect. I no longer needed their approval. I had something far more valuable. I had their attention. My journey taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters can become your biggest blind spot. And finding the courage to stand up for your own truth, your own knowledge, is the most important graduation of all. Have you ever had a moment where you had to stand up for what you knew was right, even against the people you love? I would love to hear about it. Let me know your story and where you are listening from in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more stories about navigating life's challenges and finding your strength. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, your voice, your expertise, and your value are not determined by who shows up for you. They are defined by you. Never let anyone make you feel small for what you know.